Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Are India and China heading for a reset? There's been a lot of buzz off late with statements of progress and more consensus, but little to show for it. We'll connect the dots tonight and discuss why China is keen to mend this relationship. Interestingly, this comes at a time when China's military capability is under the scanner. They were building an advanced nuclear submarine. It sank. Quite the embarrassment for Beijing. Meanwhile, in the US, Netanyahu has rejected the ceasefire proposal for Lebanon. He spoke at the UN General Assembly and he pitched for war. Zelensky visited a weapons factory in America and it backfired. It seems American domestic politics is a bigger challenge for him than Russia at this point. Then we have Elon Musk picking a fight with the UK, patching up with Brazil and denying rumors of a romance with Giorgia Meloni. In Japan, they have a new prime minister. We'll tell you who and why. From the US to Europe, the Catholic Church is struggling with sex abuse scandals. Chip giant Intel is falling behind and facing takeover bids. It's a lesson for all businesses, innovate or perish. And why animals are the biggest superstars on the internet. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Maldives President Mohammad Muizzu denies having an India out agenda, says his problem was the presence of foreign military in the island nation. Pro-China Muizzu came to power in the Maldives last November. Since then, his country's ties with India have been fraught. But Muizzu is now looking for a reset. He's scheduled to visit India in October. Myanmar's junta bombs an opposition-held town. It comes just hours after the junta issued an invitation to the rebels for talks. Two prominent ethnic armed groups have rejected the offer. In 2021, the military seized power in Myanmar in a coup. In recent months, it has suffered heavy battlefield losses. Keir Starmer meets Donald Trump in New York. It was the first meeting between the new British Prime Minister and the former US President. They were joined by Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who in 2018 had called Trump a neo-Nazi sociopath. Starmer blamed his schedule for not being able to meet Kamala Harris. Turkey jails a builder for 865 years. He was behind the construction of a building which collapsed in the 2023 earthquake. Nearly 100 people were killed in the tragedy. After the earthquake, Turkey arrested more than 250 people involved in building constructions. Ireland slaps Meta with more than $100 million in fine. The penalty was imposed for password security breaches. This incident took place in 2019, affecting 36 million Facebook and Instagram users. Many tech companies like Google, Apple and Meta have their European operations based in Dublin. And former supermodel Naomi Campbell banned from running a charity. An organization she founded has been accused of misusing funds, where the charity money was used for spa treatments and room service. The British celebrity denies any wrongdoing, says she was not running her charity. Are India and China close to a reset? This sort of stuff is usually front page news, but not this time because only one side is talking about it, and that's China. Their military spokesperson has made some significant claims. He says there's been progress at the border, that differences have been reduced and consensus has been expanded. Listen to this.
The border affairs consultation and coordination working mechanism between China and India in core commander level meetings. China and India have had in-depth exchanges about relevant issues in border regions and further reduced differences and expanded consensus.
The face-off dates back to 2020. That's when India and China clashed in the Himalayas in Ladakh's Galwan Valley. Since then, things have been tense. Both sides have built up a military presence. India has around 50 to 60,000 soldiers in the region. China has a similar number on their side. And diplomacy? We've had a number of meetings so far. Foreign ministers have met, national security advisors have met, and so have the military commanders. Put together, some 50 rounds of talks have happened between India and China. And what have they achieved? Well, both sides have pulled back from some friction points like Galwan Valley and Pangong Tso. But a couple of stress points still remain in places like Depsang and Demchok. These issues are older than the 2020 clashes. The question is, have they been resolved now? Or has some sort of consensus been reached? China did not specify that, but they did say that differences have narrowed. And India? The government has not said anything officially, but we've seen some interesting reports. Take a look at this one. It says, and I'm quoting, significant progress has been made along the border. It also hints at a possible deal, one that could factor in India's concerns. You see, Indian soldiers used to patrol a lot of these parts, but after the Galwan clash, they pulled back. The idea was to create a buffer zone to diffuse tensions. So New Delhi will want that old status quo back. They will want to resume those patrols. And this report says it could happen, but like I said, none of this is official. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been getting a lot of questions on China. First, he said 75% of the issues had been resolved. Then he said the relationship is significantly disturbed.
Those negotiations are going on. We made some progress. I would say roughly, you can say about 75% of the disengagement problems are sorted out. But once we deal with the disengagement, there is the larger issue, which is both of us have brought very large number of troops up to the border. So there is what we call the de-escalation issue. Then there is the next step is really how do you deal with the rest of the relationship, because right now the relationship is very significantly disturbed.
So what do we make of it? What explains the sudden push for consensus? Well, the timing is interesting. Russia is hosting the BRICS summit next month. Both Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping of China are expected to attend. So maybe it's a symbolic push, an attempt to de-escalate before the summit. We saw that in 2017 as well. India and China were facing off in Doklam then. But ahead of the BRICS summit, they struck a deal. They decided to de-escalate. Maybe that's the strategy again. But even otherwise, we've seen a push from China. They have been urging India to normalize ties, whether it's asking for direct flights or faster visa approvals or easier investments. Listen to the Chinese ambassador's pitch for closer ties.
I also appreciated the similarities between our two neighbors through Indian people's desire for national rejuvenation, aspiration for a better life, adherence to traditional values, and pursuit for modernization.
Now, this raises two questions. One, why is China so desperate? And two, why is India so hesitant? Well, Beijing is in a tough place right now. They face a stronger US-led alliance in the Pacific. Just look at what is happening with the Philippines. They're clashing regularly at sea. So maybe Xi Jinping doesn't want two active borders. If he had to choose, the Pacific is more pressing than the Himalayas, especially in the middle of an economic crisis. Perhaps that explains Xi Jinping's desperation. And what about India? Well, New Delhi has been clear about one thing: you cannot decouple from China. The finance ministry has called for more Chinese investments, in fact. China is also India's top trading partner. Yet, New Delhi sounds less enthusiastic about a reset. You see, it's always a question of who needs it more. And right now, that's not India. The Indian economy is better placed. The leadership is being courted by the West and the global South. So why should India take a bad deal? They can easily hold out for a better one. Secondly, trust is an issue. Many leaders, including Prime Minister Modi, engaged with China in good faith, and each time they were betrayed. So why would 2024 be any different? Just consider the latest controversy over Arunachal Pradesh. A team linked to the Indian military scaled a new mountain there. They decided to name it after the Dalai Lama, but China lashed out at them. They called it illegal, null and void. Why? Because Beijing claims Arunachal Pradesh as their own, and the Dalai Lama is a sore point for them. How can you trust a country like this? Which is why it makes sense for India to wait for a good deal to capitalize on Beijing's desperation, because for China, a consensus is a band-aid. But for India, it is a lasting solution. Unless that gap is bridged, the issues will remain. So China appears keen to settle the border. There are multiple reasons behind this shift: their internal turmoil, their external threats, and the weak economy. But there's something else too. The capacity of the Chinese military. It's under scrutiny. Do they have the military muscle for a long-term standoff with India? This question is being asked again because the PLA has suffered a big blow this year. The PLA is the People's Liberation Army. That's what the Chinese army is called. A few months back, it lost a submarine, most likely in the month of May or June. The submarine sank, and it wasn't even finished yet. China was building the sub in Wuhan, and before the PLA could start using it, it went underwater. And this wasn't just another submarine. This was China's latest cutting-edge nuclear sub. The new Zhou-class line of vessels, known for their distinctive X-shaped stern. That's the back of the submarine, the stern. This is where you find parts like the propeller and the rudder. They help the submarine move underwater. This X shape, in fact, had generated a lot of hype. Apparently, the shape improves the vessel's maneuverability. But as it turned out, the Chinese submarine had a more pressing issue: staying afloat. It failed. So Beijing tried to sync the story with the sub. They tried their best to hide this incident. Reports say the government ordered a cover-up, but they were exposed by satellites. Take a look at these pictures. This is the shipyard in Wuhan. The images were captured in May and June. In the month of May, you can clearly spot a submarine-like vessel here, but by June, the vessel is gone. In its place, there are a bunch of cranes. An American researcher, in fact, shared these images. His name is Thomas Shugart, and he found this activity unusual. Where did the submarine go? And why were there so many cranes needed at the shipyard? The conclusion was this: the submarine had sunk and the cranes were there to pull it out. In fact, let me quote from what Shugart said. Listen to this. Can you imagine a US nuclear submarine sinking in San Diego and the government hushes it up and doesn't tell anybody about it? I mean, holy cow. Well, the US agrees with this assessment, and as you can imagine, they're happy to share the news of China's failure. But this incident has also sparked some concerns, like what was on the submarine? Was it just an empty vessel? Were there personnel on board? And worse, did this vessel have nuclear fuel? Because this was not a traditional sub. Nuclear submarines have a small reactor on them, and this reactor is what powers the submarine. So the question is, did China install a reactor on this submarine? Was it carrying nuclear fuel? Did it suffer any damage? So far, there are no reports of a radiation leak, but China could have loaded nuclear fuel on this submarine. Experts say it is quite possible, but it's hard to confirm. Next question. Did China manage to retrieve the submarine? The reports say that it was, in fact, eventually salvaged. But this whole incident, the sinking of a high-tech submarine, is an embarrassment for Beijing. It has the world's biggest navy. These submarines were supposed to project China's naval prowess. Instead, they have become underwater paperweights. And that's what is raising questions about China's military capability. Is it truly war-ready? Can Chinese soldiers fight a real war? And how effective are Chinese weapons? You see, to win a war, you broadly need two things: trained soldiers and reliable weapons. And on both fronts, China appears to be falling short. Its soldiers lack real combat experience. The PLA's last war was way back in 1979 when China invaded Vietnam. Deng Xiaoping was in power at the time, 1979. He wanted to, and I'm quoting, teach Vietnam a lesson. Instead, it was the Chinese who learned a lesson. They lost the war. It's been 44 years since. In all this time, China has not fought any war. So its soldiers do not have real combat skills. There are only a few Chinese generals today who can say that they've seen any real action. And what about the weapons? Well, they don't inspire any confidence either. We've already told you about the submarine that sank. Now look at this. This story came out in January. Instead of fuel, Chinese missiles had water. At least a dozen defense officials faced action over this. They were accused of corruption. And corruption is quite rampant in the PLA. Xi Jinping has personally led the cleanup operation. Since coming to power in 2013, he has purged thousands of officials over graft, including 2 former defense ministers, Li Shangfu and Wei Fenghe. Before taking the top job, both Li and Wei had important posts. Li handled the PLA's Equipment Development Department, and Wei was the first general of China's rocket force. Both leaders now face corruption charges. They're accused of taking bribes during weapons procurement. Now let's connect these dots. China has submarines that sink, missiles that are filled with water, soldiers with no combat experience, and a corrupt top brass. So while Xi Jinping may like to project an image of strength, the cracks in his armor are showing. The PLA may have great numbers, but it is crippled by corruption and incompetence.
I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. We will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East.
In West Asia, Israel is opening another war front. It is bombing Lebanon. The target is Hezbollah, but paying the price again are ordinary people. Since Monday, 700 people have been killed. 30,000 have crossed over to Syria. They are trying to escape another war. And where is Benjamin Netanyahu? The Israeli Prime Minister is thousands of kilometers away. He is in New York addressing the United Nations General Assembly.
I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight.
Netanyahu is trying to set the record straight. After all, it's his first speech at the UNGA since the war began last October. So he came armed with evidence, maps. They are a Netanyahu staple at the United Nations General Assembly, but this time he had 2 of them, a map of blessing and a map of curse. The blessing map is the one that he showed last year. It shows the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. The curse map is the new one, and it's linked to Iran. It shows Iranian proxies in the region. And of course, it came with a warning.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
The Israeli Prime Minister did not stop there. He stressed on his war goals, bringing all hostages back, ending Hamas, and demilitarizing Gaza.
The reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go.
Netanyahu remains confident that Israel is winning this war. While the speech got some cheers, not everyone was pleased. Several delegations walked out right before he took the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, order. Order, please.
That's never bothered Netanyahu, though. And he made it clear again with his speech today that this war will continue. Ceasefire is not on Israel's mind. It has been striking Lebanon since Monday. The world called for restraint, but the appeals fell on deaf ears. So on Wednesday, the US and France came up with a proposal, a 21-day ceasefire. between Hezbollah and Israel. Basically, a temporary pause in fighting. 12 countries backed this proposal, and Washington seemed truly excited. It was like they finally had made a breakthrough. The popular assumption was that Israel had agreed to it, else why would America announce it? Reports say behind the scenes, things were looking positive. Israel and Hezbollah had seen this proposal. In fact, Israel was on board. There was a sort of an understanding. America was apparently led to believe that both parties would sign it, which is why they went public with it. Sounds like good diplomacy behind the scenes, but there was one problem. Netanyahu did not get the memo, or maybe he did, and he chose to ignore it, because hours after the ceasefire announcement, the Israeli Prime Minister denounced it. He called ceasefire reports incorrect. He said Israel will continue to fight with full force.
My policy, our policy is clear. We are continuing to hit Hezbollah with full force, and we will not stop until we achieve all our goals. First and foremost, returning the residents of the North safely to their homes.
Of course, Washington is not happy with this. America is Israel's biggest ally. They're sending them weapons. They're vetoing UN resolutions. They're going all out for Israel. So they expected Israel to return the favor. They had brought allies on board. They'd pitched for peace. The indication was that Israel would agree.
That statement we worked on last night wasn't just drawn up in a vacuum. It was done after careful consultation, not only with the countries that signed on to it, but Israel itself. And we had every reason to believe that in the drafting of it and in the delivery of it, that the Israelis were fully informed and fully aware of every word in it.
Basically, Netanyahu did a U-turn, and he may have a reason for it. Since October 7th last year, Netanyahu's approval ratings have been falling. He's not popular at all at home. But that changed this week. The pager blast, followed by the attacks in Lebanon, have boosted his ratings. If elections were to be held today in Israel, his Likud party would lead. So Netanyahu is suddenly popular again, and his far-right government wants this war. I guess the Israeli Prime Minister chose domestic support over international praise. But what does this mean for West Asia? As we speak, the attacks on Lebanon continue. Multiple explosions were heard in Beirut. Israel says the strikes will intensify. It is sending troops to the northern border. They will be stationed there, possibly for a ground invasion. So right now, peace is on the back burner. All signs point to more escalation and an all-out war. It's the last thing West Asia needs.
The President of Ukraine.
I think it was a very terrible development, and it strains the relations between the two nations at a time that's very unfortunate for Ukraine.
How times change. In 2022, Zelensky was America's favorite hero, the champion of freedom, the Superman to Putin's Lex Luthor. But you know what they say about heroes? If you live long enough, you become the villain. And that is Zelensky's story arc. He's at the center of a political row in the United States. First, the latest updates. Yesterday, Zelensky was in Washington. Joe Biden hosted him at the White House. He also unveiled a new military package for Ukraine. It's worth around $2.4 billion.
Let me be clear. Russia will not prevail in war. Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail, and we'll continue to stand by you every step of the way.
We deeply appreciate that Ukraine and America have stood side by side from the very first moments of this terrible Russian invasion. Your determination is incredibly important for us to prevail.
Zelensky also pitched his victory plan. Though the content is not clear, reports say it includes more military support and peace summits, basically more of the same. After meeting Biden, Zelensky also met Kamala Harris, and this is where things turned political. Harris used the meeting to take a potshot at Trump. She did not name the former president, but the implication was quite clear.
Candor, I share with you, Mr. President, there are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality and would require Ukraine to forego security relationships with other nations. These proposals are the same of those of Putin.
A bit of a cheap shot there, and frankly, it adds to Zelensky's problems. He needs US support to continue this war. Not just Democratic support, he also needs the Republicans. But his actions have been counterproductive. This week, Zelensky visited Pennsylvania. He toured a weapons-making factory in the state. Take a look at this. I know the pictures are great, but Pennsylvania is a swing state in the US election. It can go Democrat or Republican. So the Trump camp is up in arms. They're calling it a partisan event. The House Speaker has also written a letter to Zelensky. He wants him to fire Ukraine's envoy to the US.
I think it was a very terrible development, and it strains the relations between the two nations at a time that that's very unfortunate for Ukraine. So I regret that.
It's a fair point. The Pennsylvania governor regularly campaigns for Harris, plus the speaker says no Republican was invited. If true, it doesn't seem appropriate, which is why Trump is enraged. He's locked in a tight race with Harris, so by next year he could be president. And Donald Trump is not keen on military support. Zelensky had sought a meeting with him. At first, Trump snubbed him, but today the meeting did happen in New York, and it got off to an interesting start. Trump said that he's got a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, that too while standing next to Zelensky.
We have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have, oh, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango.
Tells you why Zelensky is worried. But let's assume that Kamala Harris wins. Even then, Zelensky needs Republicans because military packages must be approved by the US Congress. If Republicans oppose, the packages may get stalled. And we saw an example of that last year. Republicans withheld military aid for weeks before releasing it. So Zelensky should have been more careful, especially about the optics. The fact is, this war could be settled on November 5th. That's voting day in America. If Kamala Harris wins, the policy will remain unchanged. Zelensky can count on more support. But if Trump wins, all bets are off. He has talked about forcing Putin to end the war, but he hasn't explained how. Recently, Trump's running mate was asked about his strategy. Listen to the response.
Can you detail how a Trump-Vance administration would end the war in Ukraine?
Well, look, the details for how Donald Trump is going to end the war in Ukraine is by not being weak and not being dumb, which is unfortunately something you can't say for the current administration.
Not encouraging, is it? Vance says the strategy is not to be weak or dumb. I'm afraid that is not a strategy, that's bluster. A large section of Trump supporters do not support this war. They ask, why should Americans pay to defend Ukraine? Which is a fair question, a question that Zelensky has not answered yet. So it's going to be a lonely and long flight back home for Volodymyr Zelensky. He came to the US with hope and vigor. He leaves with more confusion than clarity. Staying on the topic of diplomacy, let's look at what India has been up to at the UN. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is in New York, and yesterday he met with the foreign ministers of Brazil and South Africa. They came together to discuss global issues like security, the wars in Ukraine and West Asia, and terrorism. And that last point is what we want to focus on for now. Brazil, South Africa and India have issued a joint statement urging the international community to act against all UN-listed terrorists. The statement named 4 terror groups in particular: Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Now, the entire world knows about the first 2 groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed sometimes get overlooked, perhaps because they only target India. The LET and JEM, as they're called, have one purpose: to try and capture Kashmir and merge it with Pakistan. Obviously, the two groups are based in Pakistan as well, using the country as a base from which to conduct terror operations. And they've been doing this for decades. And yet, they often fly under the radar. Hopefully, the latest statement will reverse this trend, put the focus back on these terror outfits and on their patron, Pakistan. Pakistan is known as a state sponsor of terror. It is a known sponsor of terrorism. It harbors terror groups like the Lashkar and Jaish. The Pakistani military arms and trains them and sets them loose upon innocent people in India. Having Pakistan as a neighbor is like living next to a mosquito farmer whose sole purpose in life is to release a blood-sucking swarm into your backyard. But in recent years, Pakistan's global image has almost been rehabilitated. It's off terror funding watch lists. It's getting pocket money from Western institutions again, and it's even trying to enter BRICS to give sage advice on successful economic development, no doubt. How has this happened? How has the world forgotten what Pakistan really is? Well, maybe because there are other priorities now. 2022 saw the war in Ukraine. 2023 brought the Israel-Hamas war. Before the wars, we had the Wuhan virus pandemic. It's been a chaotic few years. Everyone has been dealing with their own problems. So maybe Pakistan was not on top of their minds. It was the perfect opportunity for Islamabad to try and wipe the slate clean, to repackage itself as just a broke nation, instead of a nation that went broke while funding terrorists. Whatever its current public image, the facts remain the same as always. Pakistan is a military puppet state where the army breeds both horses and terrorists. Pakistan continues to give Lashkar and Jaish a safe haven. It continues to finance and facilitate terrorists in the hopes of one day capturing and then promptly beggaring Kashmir. So this statement is important to remind the world about Islamabad's true colors by highlighting the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. It shines the spotlight on Pakistan's explosive hobbies. It reminds the world that behind Pakistan's broke facade, there lies a regime which wants to promote violence and terror. With Brazil and South Africa extending their support, this should be seen as a victory for Indian diplomacy. What does a day look like when you are the world's richest man? Ask Elon Musk, because he has quite the exciting schedule, from picking fights with one country, making concessions to another, and fending off dating rumors. Musk's life is like a soap opera. Except this one is playing out on the social media platform X. From engaging in a diplomatic spat with the UK, to denying dating Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, our next report tells you what the Tesla CEO has been up to.
Welcome to a day in the life of Elon Musk. He's the world's richest man, but his daily life is no less than a soap opera. It starts with a cup of picking fights, continues with a side of knowing when to back down, and finally ends with a drink of rumor slaying. The first act of the day, obviously, is picking a fight. Normal humans prefer coffee. Elon Musk prefers a diplomatic dispute. So he picked a fight with the UK. The country is holding an investment summit. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has invited hundreds of investors. The goal is simple: secure funding and boosting the economy. But Elon Musk did not get an invite for this. The reason? His controversial posts about the UK riots. Now, most of us would just be mildly annoyed and move on, but not Musk. His philosophy is simple: why simmer when you can roast? So he put up this post on his social media platform X. Clearly, Musk can bid goodbye to any further invites in the UK after this. But while Musk's fights happen in the public, his reconciliations are often private. Like this one with Brazil. The country has banned X. This after the social media platform did not comply with the country's rules. Musk was quite vocal about this standoff. He sparred with the Supreme Court justice, even called him Darth Vader. But nothing stopped X from going black. Elon Musk lost a market of 21 million users. It wasn't good for business. Even a space emperor has his limits. So, in an uncharacteristic move, Musk blinked first. X has asked to be reinstated in Brazil. It has already complied with all demands, including blocking certain accounts, naming an official legal representative in Brazil, and paying some hefty fines. But you won't see a tweet about it. Concessions are not his strong suit. But here's something that is: controversy. It's his middle name, and it followed him to an awards ceremony in New York. He was there to present an award to Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. Musk presented that award and gushed profusely about the Italian premier. Obviously, the internet caught it, and soon rumors swirled. Forget Brangelina, it's time for Eloni. Headlines asked if the two were dating, and Musk, being Musk, decided to humor them. He commented on such posts and denied any such relationships. But when has that ever stopped the internet? Elon Musk should know that by now he owns one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. But that's just how Musk rolls. He wields power, controversy, and memes in equal measure. Guess no day is ever quiet when you're the guy who wants to send people to Mars, control the internet, and occasionally stir up international drama just for fun.
Now let's turn to Japan. The land of the rising sun will soon be waking up to a new prime minister. They will soon be led by this man, Shigeru Ishiba.
I am Shigeru Ishiba, the 28th Liberal Democratic Party's leader. Let's believe the people of Japan. With courage and faith, let's speak the truth. Let's make Japan, once again, a country where people can live and smile. Shigeru Ishiba will put all of his heart and soul into making Japan a safe and secure country. Thank you for your support.
Ishiba will take charge as Prime Minister on Tuesday, taking over from Fumio Kishida. Now, this is not exactly a regime change. Both men are part of the same party, Japan's Liberal Democratic Party. It's the same party that has led the country for most of the last century. General elections aren't due in Japan for another year, but it's still getting a new prime minister. Why? Because the LDP, the ruling party, was in crisis. The outgoing prime minister, Fumio Kishida, was unpopular. His reputation had taken multiple hits because of a number of scandals. Some LDP leaders were seen as too close to a dubious church. The scandal broke out after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Then there was a corruption scandal, again involving LDP lawmakers. Add to this a cost of living crisis in Japan, rising inflation and economic stagnation. You can see why the ruling party was facing flack. Kishida effectively became the fall guy, and he stepped down from his role as party leader, paving the way for the rise of Shigeru Ishiba. Ishiba is 67 years old. He has been an MP since 1986. He has served as Japan's defense minister, agriculture minister, and even the minister in charge of stopping population decline. Now, you would think that the LDP would try to find someone different, a fresh face, perhaps Japan's first woman prime minister, which almost happened, by the way. Ishiba was in a runoff against Sane Takaichi, Japan's current economic security minister. The race went down to the wire, and Ishiba finally beat Takaichi with 215 votes to 194. Now, even though Ishiba does not scream anti-establishment, he was actually considered the outsider candidate. Ishiba has a number of enemies in his own party because of his outspokenness. Let me show you an example.
One might ask, what is an Asian version of the NATO military alliance? It is an obligation to help each other when it comes to collective security. In other words, while the strength of America relatively weakens, how to build a collective security mechanism becomes an issue.
You wouldn't expect a Japanese leader to publicly say that America is weakening or to suggest an Asian NATO, which is something that the US has categorically distanced itself from. But Ishiba is outspoken about both these things and other issues too. He was one of the few LDP members to criticize the current Prime Minister publicly. He also disagrees with his party on several issues. He wants to reduce nuclear power, allow female Japanese emperors, and let Japanese women keep their maiden names. and this sets him apart from a number of his colleagues, which is why he was considered an outsider. Apparently, he prefers reading books to making conversation with his fellow lawmakers. So you can imagine that he did not have much support from fellow MPs. He won the party leadership contest because of grassroots support, and now he wants to shake up the LDP. But that being said, Ishiba is still an old LDP hand, part of the same ruling establishment. Will his premiership really change how people see his party? Will the people of Japan really give him a chance? We'll find out in the months to come. $323 million, that's how much the Catholic Church in New York will have to pay up. Why? For sexually abusing 530 children. This is a historic settlement, and it is casting a shadow over the Pope's rare visit to Europe. Pope Francis is in Belgium, another country rattled by the clergy's sex abuse scandals. Their Prime Minister is demanding justice. He says the Church has been involved in cover-ups. So no matter where the Pope goes, no matter how much he tries to rally support amid Christianity's declining numbers, he cannot escape the Church's dark past and its stories of sexual abuse, often involving children. The question is, will he do something about it? Here's a report.
A Catholic diocese in New York is going bankrupt. A diocese is a group of churches under the control of a bishop. And this bankruptcy will be the largest for any US diocese. Why? Because they'll have to pay more than $323 million to about 530 survivors who were sexually abused by priests when they were children. While this is a historic win for the survivors, despite the big payout, the Church is in hot water over its dark history of sex abuse. This case is casting a shadow over the Pope's latest tour. The 87-year-old Pope Francis is on a rare tour of Europe. Yesterday he was in Luxembourg, and today he's in Belgium. While he has arrived to spread a message of peace amid ongoing wars and encourage the dwindling Catholic flock, his visit to Belgium has witnessed a blistering start. Just as the King and Prime Minister welcomed the Pope, they blasted the Church's legacy of sex abuse.
Terrible suffering was inflicted on children, which they will carry for the rest of their lives. It has taken far too long for their cries for help to be heard or recognized.
Het heeft zo lang geduurd voor hun noodkreten werden gehoord.
Maar wanneer iets misgaat, dan kunnen...
There should be justice, but when something goes wrong, we cannot accept a cover-up. Today, therefore, words are not enough. Concrete steps must be taken.
Niet alleen woorden.
What's behind this anger? A documentary. Last year, a TV documentary was released, and it laid bare the historical sex abuse by Catholic clergy in Belgium. People shared traumatic experiences of being assaulted. The Church's cover-ups were exposed, and this sparked widespread public outrage. Now, a year after the documentary aired, the Pope himself is in Belgium. He has arrived for a mega mass, and he's meeting with 15 victims of clerical abuse. It's his first visit in 30 years, and it's being received as too little too late damage control. Some people are excited about the Pope's arrival, but many are not. Several parliamentary leaders have boycotted a meeting with the Pope, and the Prime Minister is demanding action. But so far, this is what the Pope has been able to offer.
Brothers and sisters, in this regard, this is a shame that we have to take in our hands, ask for forgiveness, and solve the problem. The shame of abuse, of child abuse.
The forgiveness won't come easily. Over the past few months, the Pope has visited one continent after another. Earlier this month, he was on a rare visit to the Asia-Pacific region. Among many countries, he visited Timor-Leste, where his mass was attended by more than 600,000 people. all while previous child sex abuse scandals of the clergy hung over his visit. The Pope is touring the world to rally support. But wherever he goes, the shadow of sex abuse across nations follows him, and he can't escape it until his words are followed by accountability and action.
It's been a dramatic week for Intel. Takeover speculations, rejected offers, plunging sales. We've seen it all this week. If you've been tracking Intel, you know why. If not, you will be confused. After all, this is supposed to be the semiconductor age. Chip companies are beating market expectations, and Intel is the OG chip company. So why are they in trouble? Let's look at the market buzz first. US media reports say that Qualcomm is trying to buy Intel. Now, Qualcomm is also an American company. They work mostly in the wireless technology space. I'm talking about things like 5G. And how did Intel respond? Well, that part is not clear yet. The company is keeping its strategy hidden. Then today, a new report came out. It said ARM Holdings tried to buy Intel's product division. ARM is a British chip company, but its majority stake is held by Japan's SoftBank. They want Intel's product division. You see, Intel has two divisions. One sells chips for gadgets. The other operates the factories and foundries. ARM did not want the factories. It only wanted the product division. And what did Intel say? Apparently, they said no. Now, both these takeover bids are quite interesting because the numbers barely match up. Listen to this carefully. Intel is worth around $102 billion. Qualcomm is worth around $190 billion, and ARM is worth $156 billion. They would struggle to complete this takeover. Maybe that's why Intel has said no. But let's come back to the first question. Why is Intel struggling? Technically, they should be leading the pack. Intel fueled the computer boom in the 1990s. They created the x86 central processing units, or CPUs. It was almost like a monopoly. Intel soon became the biggest chip company in the world, and you can see that legacy even today. Around 63% of all personal computers use Intel chips, the i3, the i5, and so on. Yet, the company is struggling. Intel shares are 50% down this year. Meanwhile, other chip companies are on a roll. NVIDIA is up 157%. And AMD is up 21%. So clearly, something has gone wrong. Experts mainly talk about three issues. Number one, Intel missed the smartphone boom. Apple had approached them to power the iPhones, but Intel was not interested. They wanted to focus on computers. They did release a mobile chip in 2012, but by then it was too late. Nearly every smartphone used an ARM-based chip. So that was one miss. Issue number two, they fell behind in the fabrication race. You see, Intel did not just design the chips, they also manufactured them. Rivals like NVIDIA and AMD ditched that strategy early on. They decided to focus on designing alone. And manufacturing? They outsourced that to East Asia, mostly Taiwan and South Korea. These companies were churning out chips to meet the global demand, but Intel could not keep up. In 2020, their 7-nanometer chip was delayed. Meanwhile, the likes of TSMC and Samsung surged ahead. That year, 2020, Intel also lost a big customer, and that was Apple. Intel may not have made chips for the iPhone, but they did power Apple's laptop and Mac, that is the MacBook. And in 2020, they ended that contract. Apple decided to design their own chip. And now to the final issue. Intel missed the artificial intelligence race. Their rivals focused on GPUs. What's a GPU? That's a graphics processing unit. Meanwhile, Intel stuck with CPUs. And what's the difference? GPUs are used in operations related to videos, special effects, and images. They're useful in building AI models. NVIDIA and AMD designed advanced GPUs, but Intel did not. So once again, they fell behind, which brings us to present day. Does Intel have a plan of action? In 2021, they brought back a former executive as CEO. His name is Pat Gelsinger. And he's betting on the US government to help them. You see, the chip supply chain is scattered outside the United States. Some of it is in Taiwan, some in China, and some in Europe. But Joe Biden wants to bring it back home. He has unveiled a special chips program. The plan is to hand out $53 billion in incentives, and Intel stands to gain. They could get $8.5 billion by the end of this year. To do what? Mostly set up new chip foundries in the US. But experts are not convinced. Chip foundries need billions in investments. They also take 3 to 4 years to set up. And this is time and money that Intel does not have, hence all this buzz of a possible takeover. But even if Intel agrees, it won't be smooth. Both Qualcomm and ARM are involved in the chip business. If they buy Intel, it would trigger antitrust concerns. I guess it's a lesson for all companies out there. No matter how big you are, innovation is key. You must plan and prepare for the future. If not, others will displace you. Our next story tonight is about the new A-listers on the internet, Mu Deng and Pesto. Mu Deng is a tiny, adorable pygmy hippo in Thailand, and Pesto is an unusually large penguin in Australia. Over the past few weeks, both have managed to win hearts the world over. They have millions of social media followers. They have spurred makeup trends, memes, and even merchandise. But they aren't alone. From Grumpy Cat to Doug the Pug, why is the internet obsessed with animals? Here's a report.
Hi! That's Her Highness throwing a fit. Good morning. Then that's her nipping the kneecaps of her caretakers and casually frolicking her way to A-list status. That is Mu Deng, Thailand's viral sensation. She's a pygmy hippo, the world's smallest species of hippo, known for their tiny stature and cuteness. So, blessed with good genetics and a quirky personality, the 2-month-old hippo has attracted international attention. Over the last few weeks, tens of thousands of people have visited the zoo where Mu Deng is being raised.
I left home in Bangkok from 6:30 a.m. this morning specifically to come and see Mu Deng. I'm here just to see her.
I knew her from TikTok, and I wanted to come to see her today because she is so cute.
Mu Deng has won the heart of social media. She has about 4 million followers on TikTok. There are Mu Deng-inspired makeup tutorials as well. The rosier the cheeks, the better. And what's more, those who can't visit Her Highness personally can watch her eat and play on a live stream. But most fans try to pay her a visit, which is good news for the zoo.
Well, I expected that she would gain some fame, but I didn't expect she'd be this famous. But this is so great because we've been gaining a lot of visitors and the zoo has been generating more income, including more earnings for everyone in the zoo as well.
Normally, this is a low season due to the rains. Around 800 people visit each day, but about 20,000 people have visited in the past 2 days. This phenomenon is beyond our expectations.
But Mu Deng is not alone. People are wild about other animal celebrities as well. Meet Pesto. This chonky baby penguin is the latest internet sensation. Pesto the king penguin lives in an Australian aquarium, but he's caught the eye of animal lovers globally because he's unusually large. At just 9 months, he's roughly 3 feet tall and weighs about 23 kilograms.
Pesto's parents, Tango and Hudson, are seasoned professionals when it comes to raising king penguin chicks. They're really good at taking turns and putting lots of focus and attention onto baby Pesto. Now, to give you some reference, both Tango and Hudson weigh only about 11 kilos.
So whether it's their main character energy or their odd size, all kinds of animals are taking over the internet. From Grumpy Cat to Doug the Pug, social media has launched one too many animals, and we humans are obsessed with their cuteness. Cat videos are practically a comfort watch. And let's face it, amid all the doom and gloom, a little meow or quack certainly can't hurt.
As always, it's time for today's joke. We're looking at a New York stand-up comedy club today, also called the United Nations General Assembly. It is supposed to be a place for serious speeches and discussions, but it's been reduced to theatre. A moment from Thursday is going viral. Haiti's president was speaking to the General Assembly. During his speech, he reached out for some water. You would think a glass would be handy, but for some reason it wasn't. Instead, the Haitian president had to drink from a jug. You can imagine how that went. Now, this was at least an innocent moment. It could happen to anyone, but some of the past incidents have not been so innocent. Take a look.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
A few moments later.
Brought a diagram for you. Here's a diagram.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In China, newly installed sewage pipes rupture, drenching cars and pedestrians. Storm Helen, which is one of the most powerful storms to hit the US, leaves behind a trail of destruction. And the world's first 3D printed hotel takes shape in Texas. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day. In 1996, the Taliban captured the Afghan capital of Kabul, establishing the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The Taliban's first stint in power came with strict rules like head-to-toe coverings for women and ban on music and TV. Their second stint right now is no different. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Bye.